every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth, and at some point that debt is paid. Lies have consequences. The great beauty of Craig Mazin's dramatisation of Chernobyl is his concept that no matter the lies that those in power need to tell their people in order to maintain control,
the accident is well under control.
There is always a reality that cannot be gotten around through spin or propaganda, through fudging of the figures, through slogans, through myths of exceptionalism. And what you see with both the Chernobyl nuclear accident of 1986 and our handling of the coronavirus pandemic is the exposure of two rotting systems in which lies no longer have any consequences. No amount of spin or propaganda can change the half-life of radioactive materials or the transmissibility or the death rate of a virus like COVID-19. It is not going to stop spreading just because we like to tell ourselves certain stories about ourselves. The coronavirus in the UK, like Chernobyl in Soviet Russia, is that moment where we hold that mirror up to ourselves as a society and we take a look and decide whether what we see is what we actually want. So if you look at some of the similarities, firstly, a late lockdown. 36 hours after nuclear reactor number 4 in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, very close to the city of Pripyat, exploded. The day after the explosion, children walking around, mothers were pushing their prams in the street, people were just going about their everyday business. In Ukraine and Belarus, the two most affected areas, school children were told to continue their May Day parades outside, even as radioactive particles were raining down on them. 36 hours later, finally, residents of Pripyat were evacuated. Similarly, in the UK, the coronavirus has been left to spread. It was only on the 23rd of March, a number of weeks after the coronavirus came to the UK, that the UK went into lockdown. Cheltenham Festival, international football matches, concerts, pubs and restaurants, all of these things remained open. The second parallel is endangered heroes. At the heart of the Chernobyl story was the immense human cost and incredible bravery in the face of a very real danger. Firefighters rushed to the scene. They had no protective equipment. Many of them died shortly afterwards. Similarly, 400 miners worked day and night. Doctors and nurses without the necessary protective equipment, without iodine tablets to prevent the absorption of radiation, all risked their lives after the explosion had happened. And there are parallels with what has happened here in the UK. Nurses smiling, wearing bin bags because of a shameful lack of personal protective equipment. Day in, day out, all of our key workers have continued doing their job, protecting us from the coronavirus and helping those who have it. I think the third parallel is the fudging of figures. The Soviet Union placed the official Chernobyl death toll at 31 people, when in reality it is likely that thousands and thousands of people will have died. Similarly, the official government figures have been anything but accurate. They are underestimates by tens of thousands, with the likes of the Financial Times and the Office for National Statistics putting the real figures now close to 60,000 people, which is one of the highest death rates in the world. And it didn't have to be that way. One of the major parallels is the scapegoating of scientists. Valery Legasov, who was a Soviet chemist who was told to lead the commission investigating the causes of the disaster, found that it was a combination of human error and what I would call institutional evil that led to the Chernobyl disaster occurring.
I must warn you, you are treading on dangerous ground.
I've already trod on dangerous ground. We're on dangerous ground right now, because of our secrets and our lies.
Legasov confronted the Soviet system with uncomfortable truths, and he paid a heavy price because of that. In Craig Mazin's television series, Legasov is portrayed as a man of integrity caught in a political trap, and I think the experts in this country are also caught in something similar. The government is keen to tell the public at any opportunity.
We're guided by the science.
But concerns have already been raised that they're just being lined up as the government's scapegoats. So in the UK, I think we can see parallels of the fictional character of Humyuk, who is meant to represent a number of scientists who helped Legasov uncover the truth about the nuclear reactor disaster. People who have questioned government response. Dr. John Ashton, who's a former director of public health, challenged the government from the get-go, and to his great credit, I think that probably did help to shift some of the narrative away from this bizarre policy of herd immunity. Similarly, Professor Neil Ferguson worked on the Imperial College modelling, which showed that 250,000 people could potentially die from the coronavirus if a lockdown was not instituted in the UK.
Are we overreacting? I would much prefer to be accused of overreacting than underreacting, let's put it that way. And this virus is the one which probably concerns me the most of everything I've worked on.
Both are examples, and there will be more, of public health experts and scientists who were willing to speak out, probably at great personal cost. So in both the Soviet Union and the UK, there's a perception that science and scientists and expertise is elevated. But in reality, when the nuclear disaster happened and the coronavirus arrived, it was actually the undermining of science and expertise because of government ideology. First of all, this dangerous policy of herd immunity, which was being followed in the early days of COVID-19. And that has raised questions about why the UK had such a late lockdown when it could have learnt the lessons from its European neighbours such as Italy and Spain.
At all stages, we have been guided by the science.
What was this science? And what other political or ideological concerns seeped into this? In a post-Brexit trade speech that Boris Johnson gave in Greenwich on the 3rd of February, when the first cases of coronavirus in the UK had already been confirmed, he talked about
new diseases such as coronavirus will trigger a panic and a desire for market segregation that go beyond what is medically rational. Then, at that moment, humanity needs some government somewhere that is willing at least to make the case powerfully for freedom of exchange.
We can see market-driven ideology which could have been placed above people's lives. Just as Chernobyl was not a mere nuclear disaster, the coronavirus in the UK and the government's response to it is not a mere epidemiological phenomenon. The responses to both of these events reveal something about the societies themselves, the rotting systems underneath, if you like, in which lives no longer have any consequences. And while I think it would be hard not to simply say that Boris Johnson is a villain just like Anatoly Dyatlov, actually that is too simplistic. It misses the fact that we're all living within institutional evils and we all actually have a role in what is unfolding. None of us are neutral in our thoughts and our actions. How have we legitimized or simply ignored a society in which market-driven ideology is placed above lives, in which the rule of law can be eroded, in which minorities are scapegoated and inequalities lived with, in which lives no longer have any consequences? One of the key lessons of the coronavirus is that it does matter who you vote for. Politics does matter. The society which is created around us does matter. None of us are neutral, even if we think by not engaging with it too much, we're not being a part of it. That's not a neutral action. We need to call out the lies that we know are lies because it can cost us our lives. The daily briefings held by the government, they're a charade of half-truth, spin and lies.
I believe that in every respect he has acted responsibly and legally and with integrity.
They're lying, we know they're lying, and they know that we know that they're lying.
Would you go on a 60-mile round trip to test your eyesight?
I have, on occasions in the past, driven with my wife in order to make sure that, what's the right way of putting it?
I'm staggered. I don't know how you're going to get out of this one, but it's going to be fun.
No.
If you read about those last days of the Soviet Union, this phenomenon was also commented upon, this hypernormalization, this feeling that people had that there were no alternatives. They knew they were being lied to. They knew that things were being kept from them. Arguably, they knew that their lives were being put at risk of what happened at Chernobyl. And yet they just did not think that things could change. And therefore, in order to maintain the semblance of a normal reality, they entered into a mise-en-scène with those in power.
What is the cost of lies? It's not that we'll mistake them for the truth. The real danger is that if we hear enough lies, then we no longer recognize the truth at all. What can we do then? What else is left but to abandon even the hope of truth and content ourselves instead with stories?
It's a very human instinct to deceive ourselves that it won't ever happen to us, that our society is not like that. We're not the Soviet Union, where it doesn't really matter whether we vote in general elections or not. Stability is inevitable. And while we might need these lies to get through the day. The coronavirus doesn't care about our need to lie to each other. It just is, just like that radioactive material sitting in nuclear reactor number 4 at Chernobyl was always going to explode if the right circumstances were met. Chernobyl was not just a nuclear disaster in which a reactor core exploded. It was also in many ways the end of the Soviet Union itself. Mikhail Gorbachev, under whose watch the disaster unfolded, said in 2006 that more than anything else, it was the nuclear meltdown at Chernobyl which led to the end of the Soviet Union. In the wake of that disaster, independence movements grew up, especially in Ukraine and Belarus. Similarly, I think we're in very interesting times in this country. Is this going to be our moment where we wake up and we look at the reality of a system in which lies no longer have consequences?
Every lie we tell incurs a debt to the truth. Sooner or later, that debt is paid.
Are we at that point? And if we're not, how are we going to get there? So I've been talking about the importance of truth and the cost of lies. And if you want to support media that's part of the solution, not part of the problem, an alternative that holds mainstream media to account, then do support Double Down News on Patreon.